Hello and welcome to another episode of Enter the Boardroom with Nurole, the business-oriented podcast that brings the boardroom to your channel of choice. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Nurole, the board-level hiring platform that specializes in the high-value chair, independent director, advisory board member, and trustee placements that drive high-impact boards. This episode, we're talking to Anne-Marie Headley, who is the Global Chief People Officer at Salary Finance, which supports a community of 4 million employees across 575 clients, including 20% of the FTSE 100 in the UK and US, providing a suite of financial employment benefits to help employees improve their financial health and happiness. She is an award-winning senior HR business leader, board advisor, and trustee who has spent more than 2 decades transforming organizations and building high-performance cultures for conglomerates like Uber, Google, and Cisco, amongst others. She's also the founder of My Workforce Buddy, a people consulting company that helps organizations scale HR infrastructure to growth initiatives. She chairs the Remuneration Committee at Salary Finance, sits on the advisory board of Natter, while also serving as a member of the Remuneration Committee at the University of Warwick and a trustee for the youth-oriented charity Onside. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Oliver.
So I'd love to start with your journey into the boardroom, and I'm always really interested to understand what the golden threads that weave that journey together have been for you.
I would say that my interest in board work has really been part of my long-term career aspirations. I realized probably a couple of years back now that my advancement into the boardroom wouldn't necessarily be facilitated by an employer. So I had to kind of figure out for myself, how would I make the jump into board work? So what I did at the time was I spoke to, specialist recruiters who kind of had openings at a board level just to determine how could somebody with my background, which is more or less traditional HR, but in fast moving private sector technology companies, make that leap. And I felt like I definitely had something to bring to the table because I'd helped to scale lots of organizations. I'd also worked with organizations that were going through quite significant change and transformation. And so I thought there was lots of skills, lots of experiences that might be helpful. But the reaction at the time, and this is probably about 5 years back, was a little bit disappointing because these companies didn't really have lots of reference points for people from the HR world who'd made the transition into the boardroom. So not only was it very rare, but they didn't really have a view on skill sets. So it was more from speaking to people in my network, to mentors, to just really determine this is where I am. What do you think some of my gaps are that I need to work on? So I kind of problem solved that myself. I knew I had some development gaps that I would need to bridge. And the way I ended up getting my foot in the door was taking the expertise I had around change and transformation, but also around org design, culture, talent, engagement. And I got my first opportunity in the non-for-profit sector, volunteering as a trustee, and that was my way into things.
So as you sort of look back on that now, and sort of someone comes to you and says, gosh, how do I make that break? What tips would you give them?
I do think perhaps in the last couple of years, things are kind of changing in this regard. I think the impact of COVID, I think the impact of, things like Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd has really heightened people's awareness around the importance of talent management and how that can have an impact on internal brand, external brand and reputation, but ultimately the success of the business. I think what's been missing in the past is this alignment between what it takes to run a business effectively, make sure that that business is future-proofing itself and creating sustainability for the future. And then how you kind of marry that with your workforce and how you organize your workforce around the work. There is a strong connection between business success and the skills that you have in your business. I always say, your business is only good as the skill sets of your people, really. So it's quite surprising that it's taken us a little while to get to this point, but things are moving in the right direction. I would say, don't be afraid to volunteer your time. That might be a happy medium in terms of you getting that first opportunity, because you're still learning what it means to perhaps be on a board. How do boards work? What does governance mean? What are the expectations of me? What are my responsibilities that I'm taking? What are the commercial responsibilities I might be taking on through this opportunity? And that will give you some time just to find out the lay of the land, embed yourself into what a board is. And I think, like definitely in the not-for-profit sector, I've had lots of onboarding support. So in my first opportunity, which was through Reading Children's Trust, there was an onboarding plan for me. They gave me a buddy on the board who could answer any questions that I might have online, offline. But they realized they needed to do an education piece. I was put on a training program with the accountants to say, this is the role of a trustee. So they provided a lot of information for me up front, basically. So I would say be open to volunteering your time to get that opportunity. In terms of your background, I think getting as many interesting career experiences as you can is going to make that just you so much more interesting for that potential board. So M&A experience, change and transformation experience, scaling the business, spinning off a business, and perhaps turning around a culture. Those are all things that I think are going to be like rich career experiences that boards are going to kind of perhaps value and want to delve into.
I love that. And for the chairs and existing board members listening who are looking out for, the next Anne Marie, what advice would you offer to them to successfully identify and bring on board talent like you that might not have had the experience of being on a board before? Like what do you think? It sounds like you had a really good sort of first board where they really took you through that journey. Are there other things that you think boards should be doing, or things you've seen boards doing badly that they should avoid doing?
Yeah, I would say the advice for the chairs of the boards would be the same for any kind of leadership team. I think you've got to be open about the skill sets, background, experiences that you want to bring into that team. And I think for a long time, you've kind of seen the same profiles of individuals showing up at a board level, like lots of people from the financial services industry, from the legal industry, people that have an investment background or a sales background. But I just think we need to think a bit broader. So I think we need to think about diversity in its broadest sense, not just the usual demographics, but also like diversity of thought. On many of the boards that I sit on now, we have people that have got very strong tenured business experience, but we also have people who are very early on in their career because the world has changed. It's about digital skills. It's about taking advantage of, different marketing channels, social media. So don't underestimate the value of somebody who comes from a different background or has a different set of experiences. So I think you want to look at experienced people. I think you want to look at early career people who might just have a different way of looking at the world. What might they be able to bring to the table? People who have not necessarily reached the top of their profession and got lots of board experience, but those that, as you quite rightly say, are looking for their first opportunity into board work. I saw a survey the other day that said that over the last couple of years, like 27% of the board opportunities have gone to people who are taking their first board role. And that must be driven by something. It's being driven by a need to have more diversity at that level, to make sure that the board, as well as the leadership team, are reflective of the customer base, but that they're not missing anything in that joined up thinking, and that you can have, the necessary challenge at that level to make the right decisions as well. So I think the advice for chairs is to be open-minded, experiment with different profiles, have your board set with the number of people that you need, but maybe offer one or two like learning assignments for like trainee or apprenticeship board members as well.
Yeah, I love that. And actually what you were saying around narrowness of thinking also resonates hugely. And for me, my background originally was working in big corporates, and actually the HR function was often seen as this administrative role. And it always struck me that there was this disconnect between the organizations where they would talk about, talent being their most important asset, and then what the organization was actually investing into the talent function, and sort of so little time spent on talent engagement. And it struck me, coming into the scale up world and the startup world, that it's even more critical. And actually the scale up and startup world does it so well. And you've been through some fascinating experiences. I think your first role was with Cisco Software, where when you joined there were sort of 20 people, and within 18 months you'd grown the team to a sort of 240, which must have been just extraordinary. What have been your lessons from that experience for boards thinking about talent?
Sure. I guess one of the lessons, like I spent quite a large part of my early career working in small organizations, and I was being hired to perhaps work with a HR director to put in all of the HR infrastructure for those businesses. So it was building everything from scratch, policies, procedures, compensation philosophies, learning development, etc., etc. So that's how I spent like my early career. And what I'm taking away from some of those experiences is that it's very hard to grow at speed without breaking things. So you quickly outgrow a lot of your processes, systems, resources, and tools. But likewise, you can be in danger of outgrowing your capabilities as a business as well, because the business is growing so quickly. The demands of your environment are changing rapidly. And if you're not careful and you are not anticipating like how the market's going to change, you can find yourself in a situation where the market's moved very quickly, but you haven't anticipated changes in skill sets. And so your capability to be able to deliver on your business strategy is really only as good as that planning and that foresight, and you taking the proactive initiative to spend some time not just managing things quarter to quarter, but looking out 18 months, 24 months to say, like, who are we going to have to be? How are we going to change based on the challenges that we're going to need to respond to in 18, 24 months' time? And so one of the challenges, one of the growing pains that I've seen, unfortunately, time and time again, is where either the leadership of the founding team has not, the capability is not kept up with the needs of the business, or the team have not spent enough time anticipating how the skill sets and capabilities of the workforce need to change in order to compete in the future. And so when those two things are not right around capability, the business always suffers. It can lead to a lot of disappointment in, you quickly having to change tactics, which might be buying new skills, exiting old skills, and all the rest of it. So I think that's definitely one of the lessons, like keeping an eye on growing pains and making sure that you are planning ahead as well as delivering in the short term, which for some small companies can literally be managing the top line from quarter to quarter.
Fascinating. What does that look like in practice when you're sitting at the board? What are you asking now of whether the boards that you sit on around those sorts of questions to flush that insight out and to help the executive teams identify those roadblocks?
Yeah. So I think you are asking for the metrics that support like their quarterly deliverables. So are we on track to deliver what we said we were going to deliver in the short term? So Q1 versus Q2, what do we think that's coming up towards the end of the year? So like business performance, maintaining the revenue, making sure that the team are being responsible in terms of operational expenditure. Yes, first and foremost, you want to make sure that's on track. But you also want to ask the questions. Okay, so who in the team is kind of planning for the future, looking a bit further down the line about the roadmap of the product and the skill sets that are required to support the business. What do you think is going to be different about next year to where we are today? How do you see the business growing? How are we anticipating the needs of our customers? What's going to be next for them? How can we drive that conversation rather than waiting for the market to tell us what they need? I think from a talent perspective, it's questioning, okay, do we have the right skill sets to deliver our strategy this year? And how are those skill sets going to change in the next 2 to 3 years?
Can you give me some examples like of where you've done that without breaking any confidences? And I suppose I'm just thinking about, I remember feeling deeply humbled the first time I sort of moved from an investor background into an operator role, where I was trying to project out what the team was going to look like in 12 months time, and and it looked so wrong after 3 months, never mind 12 months. So I kind of have given up trying to project what's going to happen. And I spend most of my time trying to focus on making sure we've got great people and that they've got an environment where they can flourish, and hoping that, they'll figure the rest out. But what have you seen in terms of sort of best practice? What practically does that look like? Are we talking about, if we're going to deliver X on sales, like how many salespeople does that, involve hiring, and what does that mean in terms of talent acquisition bandwidth, like, and digging down into the ratios around conversion rates, funnel, top of funnel, etc. on the talent side, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, and I don't want to give the illusion that it's easy to do. It's hard to do when you are stuck in the meat of delivering your business. And I know a lot of leaders kind of struggle with the balance of, focusing on, delivering in the short term versus carving that time out to plan for 12 months out or 18 months out, which probably seems like a lifetime away. So most teams that I've seen do this have achieved it by, maybe having a quarterly strategy away day where they take the leadership team off site. And the idea behind that is carving time out and boundaries for planning and long-term thinking. So you can really assess what's working in the business today, what's not. Because when you're in the weeds, sometimes it's hard to see the bigger picture. It's really hard to see things that could be improved upon outside of the tactical. So I really think it's important for leadership teams to take the time out, really evaluate what's working, where's our revenue coming from, where are we getting the return on our investments, and more importantly, where are we not? What do we need to change tactically? And I think just feeding into that, like I always thought kind of, you have your strategy, you build your strategy, and then you kind of work out what capabilities you need. But both of those things are not kind of linear processes. What I've learned is actually they're perhaps more acyclical, because you're continually in this cycle of building strategy, making sure you've got the capability to deliver on that. But then you're quickly back to strategy. Do we need to course correct? Then you're back to, okay, what does it mean for capability? So having time out to think critically and a bit further ahead, I think is really important. And I think it's all of the things that you've mentioned there in terms of examples that you would kind of question. So where is our revenue coming from today? Is it come from the places that we thought it would come from? If we've got one product today, what do we think? What do we anticipate the next product in that roadmap being? Like, how do we kind of incubate some space internally to start working on that now, as well as delivering our business? How does that impact our day-to-day operations? How does that impact skill sets? And then I think in terms of just thinking broader about, okay, so if we're creating this product roadmap, what does it mean for skills? Does it mean for mindsets and behaviors that we need to bring into the organization to make sure that we can move from A to B? It's just really determining where we are now, where do we need to be in the future? How do we create a bridge? What are those action steps that we need to take that are going to create a bridge from A to B? And just being open to answer questions, I guess, questions for ourselves around that. But you're really anticipating the growth of the business and how you would need to be organized, structured, the resources you need, the systems you need, the data you might need to pull, because when you're small, you probably run a lot of things on manual data. So when are you going to start making that investment in automated systems that will free up more time to perhaps innovate or be more strategic? So those are some of kind of the discussions that I think are important.
Brilliant. And I mean, one of my sort of experiences, again, as a sort of an operator now, is how important, we spend a lot of time now thinking about how do we equip our managers and the managers that the managers are managing, and the managers that the managers are managing, if I got that right, with the sort of support to enable the whole organization to flourish, and to make sure that there's both buy-in and accountability. And things like, we got all sorts of things wrong around not having enough single-threaded leadership and not having enough clarity around directly responsible individuals. And I suppose when I think about that back as a board member, and I think about the sort of board roles that I have, like, it's easy for me to see that as an operator in the business in the day to day, but as a board member, it can be quite difficult to identify and track some of those sorts of things. How do you go about probing, supporting the teams on that front?
Yeah, I think it's tricky for boards to sometimes get a handle on this. And that's why I think, like, by having somebody with a HR background at that level, knowing what questions to ask, knowing how the data should look, being able to interpret the data, to get insights that they can then ask the right questions about is so key. Without that, there can sometimes be an assumption that if the executive team have a business strategy that has a people pillar, then great, everything's taken care of. But that's just the start of the conversation. And in a lot of respects, as an executive team, even if you build a people strategy at 10,000 feet, it's not going to be successful unless it's actually pulled through those layers of the organization that you mentioned. And so middle managers and other management buy-in is key. And the reason for that is because, we are asking those managers to, one, be responsible for delivering the performance of the business and elevating the performance of the business. But they also have a secondary role of really bringing to life the employee experience as well. As HR practitioners, we can build company-wide programming, we can build strategy at 10,000 feet, but it really is those day-to-day experiences at a team level with the people that are closest to the talent, so the day-to-day managers that really bring that strategy, those well-intentioned programs to life. It's the day-to-day experience I have with my manager and my team that determines, do I like it here? Do I feel that this organization is looking out for me? Do I feel this organization is living up to its values? That's all based on my day-to-day experiences with the people that I work most closely with. And so it's a mistake to think actually retention happens in some department called HR, which is like over there. Actually, that retention piece is happening every day in teams. So we do, of course, we need our leaders, we need our managers to understand that responsibility, but also to be rewarded for the role they play in that as well. One of the growing pains of fast moving organizations is that you tend to take the most talented people who are doing good work and then you give them people to manage. So the people who know how to do the work tell other people how to do the work to the same standard. And sometimes that investment, though, in their leadership and their people management isn't there. And some of the work that I've tried to solve through my consultancy is by equipping leaders, middle managers with the skills they need to take on that responsibility and deliver it to their best potential. Otherwise, we are just asking our leaders to wear lots of different hats. We're not equipping them with the skills to do that with confidence or with strong capability. And then that impacts the experience people have, but also ultimately is going to impact the performance of the business. So it's short-sighted, and it's something that organizations can quickly get on top of. If your executive team are coming to the board, there may be blind spots they have themselves about their own leadership or how to organize their talent around the work in the best possible ways. Maybe they haven't had great leadership examples themselves. So they might be coming to the board and assuming things are well because, there isn't a massive attrition data point or, they're not hearing bad things that happen in the business. But how often do leaders right at the top of the organization, how often are they really told the realities of what it is to work at the organization? It's actually a collection of different data points that you might get through different surveys or feedback from people leaders or exit interviews, which helps you really pull that accurate picture together. So I think the board needs to be aware of like the development needs of the leadership team and anticipate what some of the blind spots might be with that leadership team or that executive layer, not just around the commercial realities of the business, but also things like culture, organizational design and development, their own leadership style, and the employee experience.
Interesting. So what might that look like? If you think of some of the leadership teams you've worked with as a board member, without breaking any confidences, can you kind of, I suppose, sketch out what those blind spots look like on the talent front?
I think a recurring theme is the ability of some leaders and middle managers to have tough conversations, to, have a very clear expectation of what the performance bar should be within the organization and be committed to continually evolving that performance bar. So a performance bar shouldn't be static. What was good performance last year might not be good performance this year. And as you bring new people into the organization, that performance bar is inevitably going to lift because you're bringing people in, they've got different skill sets. Perhaps they've worked in more mature organizations. They have, access to different ways of doing things, different best practices bringing in. And if you take like maybe your sales team as an example, you might have a sales team that is used to delivering 80% of target every year. And under the constraints of the environment, that's considered good. And then you've got kind of an A-player salesperson who comes in, suddenly hits 100% of their target. Well, we should be looking at that to say, okay, under the conditions, how was that 100% achieved? Was it skill sets? Was it environment? Was it mindset? Was it a whole host of different behaviors? And then if so, how can we replicate that? So the performance bar is always evolving and improving, and we're learning on what works and doesn't, and we're open to trying different tactics. I think that's really key. I would also say like having a culture and a mindset where, especially in fast-paced organizations, that you are moving at pace and you're moving at speed. And kind of what supports that is a culture of experimentation. So I could kind of build a plan end to end, all the action steps are in there. Or actually, I could actually think through this program or problem 60 to 70%, get going and iterate and course correct as I go. Because I know the environment's going to change. I know if I'm in a fast-paced environment, even if I've got the best laid plan, like things change internally, things change externally. So let's get going with our 60, 70% methodology and our thinking. Let's get on the road, but let's keep a close eye on things and iterate as we go. And I think that can be quite helpful for organizations that need to move at speed. And I think it's just a helpful mindset, I think, for leaders who inevitably are going to be managing a lot of change and transformation as well. Having that mindset, I think, is key.
Okay, super interesting. So you talked about two examples there of sort of talent blind spots that you might identify as a board member. So where either there's difficulty having those performance conversations as the first one. Let's take that as an example. Where do you go from there as a board member? And I suppose there's always that risk of treading the fine line between being an executive and a non-executive. Like once you've identified that, where do you take it from there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you can do. I think like as you are reviewing kind of performance against business goals, you can always be encouraging that executive team to have stretch goals. So what was good performance in Q1, or what, if they hit a certain revenue number in Q1, how do we as a board encourage that executive team to have ambitious goals and be gradually like increasing what they're able to deliver by finding new ways to deliver perhaps more with the same workforce, basically, or more with less, or whatever it means. But the board are in control of that because they will help set some of the targets of that organization. So yes, if an organization is performing well, provide that feedback. Okay, like if we were able to do this, what if we set ourselves an ambitious goal to hit this revenue number or this EBITDA number for quarters Q3 and Q4, etc. So making sure there's stretch goals, making sure the organization and the executive team are being ambitious about their strategy and what it is they're going after. And then I think specifically on the performance example there, one of the things that boards might be curious about is to understand, succession and to understand like the high potential performance of the organization. So by the executive team undergoing an exercise where perhaps they are looking at critical skills in the organization, high performers, how they retain those high performers, and being able to share data on X% of our workforce we consider to be in critical roles. So if they were to be removed tomorrow, this is what the risk would be, but also X% of our organization we would consider to be high potentials. And this is the group that we want to invest in. This is the group that we want to make sure that we retain. And maybe we do something different for this particular group of people because these are the ones that are really driving our progress as an organization. I think it can be sometimes interesting for boards just to be aware that those discussions are happening and to understand what that might look like. Because if you have an organization of C players, like, is that going to get you to where you want to go to? Or are there some short-term investments that actually we need to persuade the board to support in order for us to move from C players to A players? What's that going to mean in terms of the bottom line? What's that going to mean in terms of our ability to drive change and transformation, to be competitive, and to build a sustainable business?
Super interesting. You've talked a little bit about some of the data that you look at, and so for example, we internally will track, I don't know, retention, sick days, sick incidences. We've got a whole load of sort of net promoter scores. We use a sort of people analytics platform that does a sort of weekly pulse survey that gets aggregated, and you can then cut up along different sort of demographic and functional lines. And we're sort of triangulating between all of those things. One of my experiences from that as an operator is that the data doesn't always tell you the truth. It's only as good as ever with data as what gets put in. My experience as a board member is it's quite difficult often to get that data from an organization that isn't built with that mindset, that sort of data-led mindset in the HR side. What do you see as the critical KPIs on that talent front? What are the ones that you're looking for from organizations you're working with?
Yeah, it depends on, I guess, who the organization is, and then also what their objectives are and what the business KPIs are as well. I think what you want to do when you're looking at people analytics is look at it in the context of those business KPIs as well, and what it is that the business is tasked to deliver on, but also the performance against how they're trending performance-wise against those deliverables. And I think that's where you can start to see some of the trends, and you can start to identify pain points for the organization as well. So some interesting data points might be revenue per headcount. So what's the revenue generated per person in the organization? How's that changing from one year to another? That's quite an interesting insight to kind of look at. What does that mean in terms of productivity? How is productivity being driven? Number might give you some insight into that. What else would I say is very key? So all the things that you would generally look like to just try and determine if the environment that's being created for the workforce is a positive, healthy environment, because that plays into, can play into reputational damage. And there's some well-documented cases around that. So things like, the OSAT satisfaction, like what's the experience people are having? How is that evolving? Is the experience the same from one team to another or one geography to another? What employees saying about their leadership, about the alignment with the work that they're doing and the company's broader mission? What's happening from, an external perspective? So comparing internal satisfaction or NPS numbers with, things like ratings on Glassdoor. Is there alignment there? Is there a difference there? What does that mean? So I think they're definitely important things to look at, as well as like your attrition stats. I think skills audits are really important. So what's if we did an audit today, what are the skill sets of our organization? Are we comfortable that we have the right skills? How are those? And then anticipating a quick bit further, like what skills are going to be important in the next 18 months? And do some of the skills we have today become extinct in a year's time or in 18 months' time? And how do we get ahead of that? I think those things are kind of key, basically. Ratio, if you think about layers, spans and control, which all feeds into org design, how many layers of the organization do we have? Do the number of layers support kind of us getting communication, the two-way communication from the top down and the bottom up, in making that happen in the most efficient way possible? Do we have a two-way communication process? I think that's cool. And then in terms of span of control, like what's the ratio of managers to employees? Does that feel right? And is our org structure right? Do we have a pyramid? Do we have a different shape? Are we comfortable with that shape? Is it supporting the needs of the business? I think there's lots of things that you can look at and curate based on what it is that you are trying to achieve together. And as I said, those business metrics.
Super interesting. I want to pick up on a little bit on a point that you touched on there around engagement. Feels like a fascinating moment in time where think I saw an amazing sort of survey the other day, which sort of reckoned that over sort of half the workforce is struggling with burnout, talk of, silent quitting. What do you think boards need to be thinking about on that front as they think about talent engagement? It strikes me that it's often not given as much time on the agendas as it perhaps should be, given the number of boards that say people are our most important asset. What do you see as being critical there?
Yeah. So I think it's some joined up thinking around what is it that we're here to do together as a team? What is it we need to achieve together? What does that mean for what we as an organization need from our talent? What do we need? Mindsets, behaviors, knowledge, skill sets, work ethic. What is it that we need in order to deliver on these, big, hairy, audacious goals? And what do we offer in return? And sometimes we miss the what do we offer in return. But in it, what we've seen over the past, I'd say 18 months is an employees market where actually they've driven where they've wanted to work. And in a climate like that, what can be really key is having a very clear employee value proposition. So this is what we offer, this is what we expect from you, but this is what you can gain from the opportunity. And not all organizations are built the same and can offer the same thing. So it's been very crisp and clear about what you can offer and what you can't offer. So if you are going to invest in bringing new people to the organization, there isn't a misalignment between what they're looking for and what you can offer.
Could you maybe give me an example of what that looks like in, say, a commercial environment versus, say, a not-for-profit environment? Does it look different?
Yeah. So let's say the commercial environment, let's say in a scale-up environment, you are hiring perhaps early career talent or mid-level talent because that's what your budget allows you to do. What might be important to that early career talent is learning new skills and being able to add those skills to their CV. You might not be able to offer that talent compensation at the top of the market. You might not be able to offer them lots of internal mobility. They might not be able to move into lots of different roles in the organization or move geographically because maybe you're just operating in one location, right? In one country. But can you offer them skills development, and what is your commitment to growing them whilst they're on the job? And does that fit for what they're looking for in the interview process in terms of their next opportunity? How that might differ for non-for-profit? Well, maybe purpose and mission. I think purpose and mission are equally important in the private sector. But let's, for just argument's sake, say actually in the non-for-profit sector, maybe I'm not looking for lots of mobility, conversation at the top end of the market, and maybe I don't need to be growing lots of new skills at the day, but I want to do really rewarding work. And I want to make sure that the work I'm doing has an impact and helps the members of the non-for-profit charity. So people join organizations for lots of different reasons. It might be to work with the best talent of the industry. It could be lots of other reasons, let's just say. So you have to define like what's true of my environment and my experience. And you message that through your recruitment process. You message it through your values. You message it through the onboarding process. And you make sure that your environment and the cyclical programs that you have actually deliver on that. And that's where you're going to get the alignment.
Super interesting. Yeah, no, that really resonates. And actually, I consistently underestimate how important that is. And I was reminded of it. Actually, we do this. I do by rotation with the different sort of teams, a sort of CEO lunch where they can sort of do an ask me anything thing. And we started doing this on the back of one of those lunches. Actually, a bunch of our engineering team had said that we feel disconnected from the customer and the purpose. And so we started arranging ththese, where we got customers who'd use the platform to hire people successfully come and talk about the impact. And there was a couple of them who were talking. One of them is a massive climber, and we just helped the British Mountaineering Club or something like that. And one of them loves cats, and we just helped Battersea Dogs Home find new trustees. And you could just see their eyes lighting up as they talked about this and having that connection. And I, as I say, I consistently underestimate what an impact that has on people and their sort of motivation.
And if you look at a lot of the drivers of engagement, like people want to come to work, they want to earn a decent living, they want to grow their skills, but they also want to be working for an organization that has impact, that has a clear mission and purpose. And at Salary Finance, where we've kind of done deep dive conversations on culture and what it is that employees value most about their experience, number one, it's the mission. And, we are continually sharing, video testimonials from our clients that just talk about the difference that Salary Finance have made to their life, what it's made to their family's life, what they can now do differently. And that can be extremely powerful. And for our workforce, where mission is extremely important, you can't underestimate the impact that's going to have on an individual to know that they're really helping others.
Definitely. You also talked earlier a little bit about your experiences in high performance cultures. What exactly does that mean for you, and what role do you see the board playing in ensuring there is a high performance culture? We recently implemented this on the back of some work we've done with a coach called Owen Eastwood, who has these 10 characteristics of high performance cultures that include things like, energizing people through belonging cues, through having a clear story of us, through a clear vision, optimism, clear sense of mission, clarity, shared values, alignment, making sure that feedback is as an energizer and creating energy through confronting burnout. And we're going to go through these things pretty consistently and just think about, how are we doing on each of those fronts? And actually, it's been really helpful for us. But what does creating a high performance mean for you? And as I say, how does the board feed into that?
Yeah. So I think building a high performance culture is really about being clear on what the standard of performance needs to be in order to drive business results, basically. And we talked earlier about the fact that that's going to be a moving target and that performance standard is going to continually evolve. But I think it's all of the things that you've mentioned. And if I was to summarize it, it would be setting that performance bar around how you deliver and execute in your roles, how you show up in the organization as an individual, but also how you collaborate with others to deliver on the company's goals. So I think you create expectations around all of those things. And the levers that you use to reinforce those expectations are things like your vision and your company values and your norms and behaviors and the things that you play back in terms of how people succeed in your organization, the things that you value as an organization, and you reinforce that all the time through the things that you communicate, what you provide recognition to, the things that you reward people on. You're really reinforcing like that standard of expectations around what's expected from employees and the level that's expected of.
So that makes sense at the executive level, and in terms of what you're doing. How do you, as a board member with that sort of functional expertise, go about assessing whether or not that's happening and pushing it on and advancing it to the extent it's not?
So I think it kind of starts with the goals process. So as a board, you will be reviewing financial results, you will be looking at productivity. So you will be able to tell, like if those numbers are moving in a positive direction, then that's an indication that things are being done in the right way and that we are kind of testing people to deliver their best work. We are stretching them. We are raising the performance bar. If those numbers are moving in the wrong direction, then that's an indication that actually things are going in the reverse. What's changed? What's changed in the environment? What's changed in terms of what we're asking people to do? What's the impact of different change that's happening in the organization? Is it leading to low productivity, low morale? So you'll see it from the business results and the business metrics that you're trying to drive, basically. If you look at most research into high performing teams, if you take like Gallup, for example, and, the work of Marcus Buckingham around, the best teams, and Marcus Buckingham and Gallup have obviously done lots of research over, millions and millions of people. There are some things culturally that you need to have in place in order to get the best out of employees and help them deliver their best work. And a lot of it is about making sure that you have the right people in the right seats doing the right work in the right way. And that's all about helping people play to their strengths. when you allow people to play to their strengths, you get that discretionary effort. People are really passionate. They want to go further in terms of what they're delivering. And so I think the top three things are create an environment people can play to their strengths, having a shared understanding of what excellence looks like. So if I'm in a team with you, Oliver, we both agree that this is the standard we want to work at and we both want to be A players, but then also having a team culture where, it's safe. We have each other's back. It's safe to fail. If I fumble, maybe you pick me up. We're working together collaboratively as a team. And I think once you get those conditions right as part of your culture, then extraordinary things happen and you really can get to this operational excellence, this discretionary effort, have people outperforming in their roles, which can have really positive benefits on an organization.
So if I'm sitting on a board and I'm digging down into the organizations, trying to figure out, is this a high performance culture? What am I looking for? Am I sort of saying to them, show me the evidence that you've created this alignment around what good looks like? What are the questions you think I should be asking?
Yeah, so I think it's having a culture of accountability where you have obviously your business objectives at a senior leadership team level, but there's alignment in terms of how those kind of pull through to each team, to each business function. So if I'm, I don't know, in the HR team or the finance team or in the operations team, the goals that I've been asked to work on, I can see that there's alignment with what we're trying to deliver as a broader organization. I'm now motivated. I can see what role I need to play. I know that my individual goals, if you go from BU or functional goals to now my individual goals as a member of the team alignment, I can see where I fit in and where I'm driving the needle on a metric that's part of a bigger picture. So that sense of shared goals from the top to the bottom, which are aligned, which are communicated, where I have access and visibility to how we're performing against those goals. So lots of transparency around how the business is performing, how those goals are developing, where are we hitting, where are we missing, what does that mean for me in terms of my objectives that I'm going to be measured on across the year. I think kind of drives commitment. It kind of drives a sense of we're in this together. And I think that alignment is really important in terms of engagement. If I see where I can fit in, then, I'm going to be more motivated to deliver the things that I've been tasked with delivering, basically, because I can see where they're going to add value and help move the needle, moving this organization forward. So the question you can ask is, okay, so we have these business strategy goals. How are they being pulled through at a functional level? What does that mean? Does everybody have objectives? And are we confident that those are structured objectives and that we're asking people to, up their game, but also that we are, give them the support to up their game as well on the job. So I think goals is something that's really important. I think having an executive team that are very clear and are spending time analyzing how their business is performing and being able to communicate that through the organization is important, because you want your employees to be responsible with their spend, understand what are the biggest priorities for the organization. So the leaders need to be communicating all the time, what's working, what's not working, where we're behind, where we're in front, the celebration of those successes, etc. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's a really difficult question, but definitely that's very helpful. I'd like to just move on to a slightly different sort of angle, and I'm curious to understand how you have evolved as a board member. How are you different now from when you first started as a board member? What's changed?
I think when I first started, I was more in learner mode and I was just observing the dynamics of the board. I probably would weigh in on areas of expertise, but I was just absorbing everything in the room. So the dynamics of the board, but also how to communicate at that level, understanding what the role of the board really is, because it can be tempting if you're coming from an executive background to want to provide answers or want to share expertise. And that's not the role of the board. The board is to ask questions that kind of help the executive team figure out kind of what's working, what's not working, and how they might want to change things. Perhaps in non-profit area, you might be very lucky to have board members who can be more hands-on. And I've definitely been more hands-on, definitely with respect to some of the trustee roles that I've had with charities. And I would say, I guess, how I've evolved has been kind of moving from that learner to having a lot more confidence, to be more clear on what good governance looks like from a board, to be, I guess, more clear on what my expectations are from the executive team, to share what I think good looks like in terms of performance, performance against objectives, but also on that people piece as well. And to probe, and ask the right questions around the workforce and the structure of the teams, what they're doing in terms of engagement, morale, bringing in the right skills to the organization, which I think is really key for an organization that has big plans, that is going through change and transformation. A lot of that is about making sure that you have the right people to deliver on that. So yeah, I would say confidence is improved, governance is improved. I'm now clear on the expectations that I have on those executives. I'm very comfortable voicing what those expectations are, challenging the thinking, but also providing support as well, whether that's in the boardroom or offline as well.
Yeah, actually, that resonates a lot. I've definitely been guilty in the past of providing lots of challenge and too little support. It's easy to forget that your role in that boardroom is also to support that it's flipping difficult as an exec. And if you go into that boardroom and just get challenged the whole time, it's miserable.
Yeah.
And actually having someone who appreciates and recognizes all the things that are going right, is something I've certainly really appreciated from the boards that I've worked with. And I think a lot of the best board members are very good at doing. One last question before we move into the wrap up section is around just your experience of boards you've worked with where they've added most tangible value. I sometimes get asked by people, a board is the pain in the backside. It's something to be endured, which I strongly believe is not the case. I think boards can be transformational in terms of the value. And so I'm always really interested to understand where people have seen boards adding most value. Is there a sort of particular example that stands out in your mind of where the board has really added most value?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that board and the executive team have the same vested interests. We all want to make sure that that organization is successful. So we're on the same team. And you might need to use different tactics to get to that. You might need to stick approaches sometimes, but you can't be stick all of the time. And you can't create a toxic situation where your executive team can't come to that table and be candid and transparent about what's really going on and the problems and the obstacles that they're facing. That's a disaster if you're creating the wrong dynamics where that team might hide things or they might share, very favorable data points, let's just say. So you want to avoid that at all costs. I think boards can be transformational. If I look at some of the boards that I have the pleasure of sitting on, the breadth of experience is incredible, basically. You've got CEOs of just incredible businesses who've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, who've got all the battle scars that they can share with that founding team or that executive team up front. And I think there's lots of value in learning from others, but also learning what's not gone well for others. Because you can kind of anticipate some of those things and choose to do things in a different way. So I think having people who've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, I think is really key. People who are credible leaders and know how to set a vision and know how to bring people with them on that vision, I think is key. Also having people who have got amazing networks. You might be stumbling in your business in terms of reach or investors or the right partnerships. So having industry people who are well connected can be the difference between the extent to which you grow this year and what you don't, because of those really key critical relationships that they will bring to the table. And then having board members that have areas of expertise that you don't have in your executive team or you're not able to fund in your executive team today. My consultancy was really about bringing HR expertise to leadership teams that didn't have the budget to invest in a very senior, experienced HR person, but were making short-term decisions about people that would have longer-term consequences. If you're a scaling organization, it's not the right time for you to hire CPO, maybe bring in that expertise at a board level or advisory level. So you're filling a gap of expertise that that you don't have in your executive team. So you're closing a blind spot. So I agree with you. I think boards can be transformational. through the good times and the tough times as well. But it's about relationships, and it's about kind of having that shared vested interest. Sometimes there's some tough love that's involved, but that's all important for the growing process for, those executives and that senior leadership team. Like, we all need to grow whatever level you're at. And I think the more experience that you can bring, as well as that diversity of thought for people to think inside and outside of the box as well, can be hugely beneficial.
Brilliant. I love that. Anne-Marie, I could keep asking you questions all day, but it's time to move on to our sort of final section. The first of these is a new section where we've got what we call a linked question, where I've asked each guest to ask a question to the next guest without knowing who that will be. So you don't know the question yet. I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you ready to experiment?
I am bracing myself. My knees are quivering over here.
Great. So the question is, what will a board look like in 2045?
Oh my goodness. What would a board look like in 2045? I'd like to think that it would look very diverse. And I think we're starting that journey now. I think it would definitely be a reality. If you look at some of the McKinsey research around what CEOs say that they need and the skills that are most important for their executive team in the future, a lot of them are skills around collaboration and how you get teams to work together. Many of those have been skills that have traditionally been emphasized more, deployed more by female leaders. And so I think that's quite an interesting scenario, basically. What can we learn from female leadership, and what role are some of those traditional female skill sets going to play? How important are they going to be for everybody, regardless of gender or regardless of any other demographic? So I think what's needed to succeed business-wise or needed to succeed is changing. And so I think from that perspective, it'll be interesting to see where we land in 2045. In terms of the dynamic between the board and the executive team, that might be quite interesting. Like, would it look like how it looks today? Perhaps not. Maybe you'd have executive members joining the board members joining the executive team at different parts of that company's stage of development. How interesting might that be? So I don't know. But I'd like to think that in terms of the things that we now know are important, in terms of mission, culture, as well as kind of just the traditional importance of governance and financial management, that we are looking at the success of organizations on a number of fronts. So finance, yes; governance, yes; growing market share, yes; but also that we are holding that executive team a new standards around engagement, culture, reputation, employer brand, and all of those things as well. So maybe the definition of success is a bit broader than what it is today.
Love that. And finally, we'll move to the 5-question quickfire, where I say a short statement and ask you for a quick response. Are you ready?
I am ready as I ever be.
Great. So the best book that every board member should read and why?
I'm probably like showing my age here, but as a person that's come from a scale-up background, I would say Jim Collins, Good to Great. So you can make money, you can have a good profitable business, but how can we get more of those unicorns? And so I think that the differences between good organization and what great leaders do to create like a really exemplary organization, I think is important to kind of spend some time thinking about.
It's a great one. Your favorite quote and why?
Probably my favorite quote kind of comes from my mum and my background, which is fail to prepare, prepare to fail. I've kind of had that drummed into me as a young child. So it's just stuck with me along the way.
I love that. Your best ever holiday and why?
My best ever holiday is I kind of took a gap year after one of my first jobs, and I went with a group of people and we kind of backpacked. We bought one of those round the world tickets and we backpacked for 5 months. That was amazing because obviously it was my opportunity to see the world. I was fascinated by different cultures. I ended up, traveling through Southeast Asia, Northern America, etc. And it was just fascinating free period of my life where I thought I could do anything. And I came back with so many rich career experiences that I reflect on now, but just with a newfound confidence that, there's a big wide world out there and there's lots for me to see and achieve.
Love that. Your most significant professional insight?
That's a hard question to answer, but definitely a professional insight that I kind of take from one job to another is that idea from, is it Marshall Goldsmith? So, what got you here won't get you there. And that's really just a philosophy that I live by personally, but also professionally. It's a reminder to me that I need to be continuously evolving and learning, and so do organizations. And there's going to be, what's the value in maintaining the status quo when actually we should be thinking about how we can do things better, faster, more effectively, etc. So challenging ourselves individually, but also in teams to be continually thinking about delivering greater value, I think is key.
Brilliant. And last but not least, your favorite app?
Do I have a favorite app? What I can say is I'm not a massive social media person. I'm a big fan of LinkedIn, but I've recently got into Instagram. So I am observing, putting myself out there a little bit, but I have found that there's lots of amazing things on Instagram. And so I'm trying to learn, be a bit more proactive about the time I spend on social media.
Love it. Anne-Marie, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute joy chatting with you.
Oh, thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you, and the Nurole team as well.